Forsyth. Everybody can hear okay?
Yes.
Before I get started, I want to make an announcement. There's an exciting free event coming up in just 2 weeks. It's the first ever GMO Summit. At the GMO Summit, you will learn the true effects of genetically engineered food on human health and the environment. You're invited to join a panel of experts, researchers, and activists in an inspirational and free 3-day GMO Summit, October 25th to the 27th. It's online. You can attend in your pajamas. Just Google GMO Summit and register. This is an awesome, amazing opportunity. It's the first ever. Google GMO Summit. So Monsanto. What is it about this multinational corporation that makes it one of the wealthiest, one of the most politically influential, and one of the most hated corporations on the planet?
Yes.
They began in 1901 as a small chemical company and have grown to annual net sales now of over $12 billion. They produced several notorious products before they ever started with GMOs. Saccharin and aspartame are two of the most toxic artificial sweeteners on the market. They're currently used in more than 6,000 consumer foods and beverages. You might ask, why are they still on the market if they're so toxic? That's a good question. Stay tuned, there's an answer. Dioxin-based herbicides like Agent Orange, which directly killed and maimed millions of Vietnamese during and after the Vietnam War. Thousands of our soldiers were exposed to it during that period and are still suffering from at least 50 identifiable illnesses and about 20 separate birth defects that are directly linked to Agent Orange. Banned pesticides such as DDT, directly responsible for the death of millions of marine animals, birds of prey, and amphibians. Deadly polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, have been discharged in massive quantities in rivers and landfills for decades at the expense of human health and the environment. Bovine growth hormone, RBGH, unnaturally increases the milk yield in lactating cows at the expense of the health of the cow and, of course, the safety of the milk. This litany of woe takes us only into the 1980s, when Monsanto shifted their attention to controlling and ultimately genetically modifying the seeds that are the world's food supply. By the late 1980s, Monsanto was ready for Act Two. Monsanto has always made money, but for the rest of the world on the receiving end, it's been sort of a reverse Midas touch. Because of the death and misery Monsanto has inflicted globally from almost every product they produce, they have a long history of legal troubles. These legal troubles span the globe. Normally, a company cannot expand their market when they're facing massive legal troubles, unless you have friends in the right places. Monsanto has showered boatloads of money on astroturf organizations, research facilities, universities, and politicians. Lots and lots of politicians. Hello, testing. Check 1 2. Testing 1 2. Okay. Lots of politicians. So bribery is all well and good, but there remained an annoying fact. Mounting objective evidence is showing that their products were and are still poisoning our land, food, water, and all the living things that consume their products. Under such dire circumstances, bribery, it just is not enough. So the linchpin of Monsanto's strategy to persist and to prevail, in spite of the constant litany of bad news, is the same strategy that any successful parasite uses to thrive. They attach themselves to a host. For Monsanto, that meant penetrating the political and regulatory systems that could feed, protect, and enable them. So how did that work exactly? Back in the 1980s, when GMOs were first coming out, and there were no laws and no regulations. It was a Wild West. Monsanto went to the Reagan administration and asked them to regulate, wink, wink, the GMO industry. Why did they do this? Because for decades, Monsanto has been a very unpopular company due to the fact that they have been continually lying about the toxicity of their products. So they figured that if the government gave a rubber stamp to their work with GMOs, it would be like the government was approving it, which would give them instant credibility and relieve them of a great deal of liability. Over the next decade, they got exactly what they wanted, a rubber stamp from the FDA that meant nothing, but gave the illusion that the government was regulating GMOs. The first Bush administration was a great believer in biotechnology, in spite of evidence rolling in, even then, that it was a risky business. So Bush number one, this is where the revolving door begins. Bush number one placed Michael Taylor, a former attorney for Monsanto, in charge of policy at the FDA. Michael Taylor was moved from Monsanto to FDA, and he was put in that position with the instructions to promote biotechnology at the FDA. Michael Taylor did as he was instructed. He drafted the now infamous FDA policy in 1992, which stated, and I quote literally, "The agency is not aware of any information showing that foods derived by these new methods differ from other foods in any meaningful or uniform way," end of quote. That sentence from the 1992 FDA policy still stands today and is the single biggest reason why GM crops are still on the market today, poisoning everything that eats them. A subsequent lawsuit and Freedom of Information Act request forced the FDA to turn over thousands of their secret memos. Upon examining these documents, it turned out that the FDA's statement of policy that GMO products were substantially the same as natural products was a lie. Who knew, right? Actually, many knew. There was an overwhelming consensus among scientists working at the FDA that GMOs were dangerous and should be carefully tested. They warned against toxins, allergens, new diseases, and nutritional problems, and they complained about the proposed regulation that came out. Michael Taylor ignored those FDA scientists and published the policy anyway, because that is why he was hired, to help put GMOs on the map. On the basis of this 1992 statement, the FDA concluded that no safety testing was necessary. If Monsanto and other biotech food companies say their foods are safe, the FDA has no further questions. This was a blank check to Monsanto to put GMO development in high gear and get untested products out into the marketplace as fast as possible, using what we have come to learn now are lies, distortions, and empty propaganda. So the revolving door begins again. Having done wonderful things for Monsanto while he was at the FDA, Michael Taylor was rewarded with a new job at Monsanto as vice president. But it gets better. And thanks to the Obama administration, Michael Taylor is now back at the FDA as, parents, you may want to cover the ears of your children for the next, what I'm going to say. He's back at the FDA as Obama's food safety czar. How great is that?
Horrible!
High-level commissioners and bureaucrats at the FDA, EPA, and USDA are constantly rotating positions with Monsanto and other pharmaceutical and biotech companies. It compromises each agency's integrity and credibility with the public and with the scientific community at large. Graft and corruption neglect and corruption in our regulatory agencies is an equal opportunity employer, both Republicans and Democrats are happy to oblige. But regulatory agencies can only do so much for their masters. Monsanto completes their stranglehold on the American government by deploying an army of lobbyists to coerce legislators into doing what regulators cannot do. This includes an emphasis on resisting and suppressing where possible, the increasing public demand to label genetically modified foods. It includes avoiding responsibility for colony collapse disorder that is wreaking havoc on the global bee populations, and it includes a deterrence of any effort to institute independent, government-led testing of genetically modified seeds and food. So while Monsanto maintains a motto of improving agriculture, improving lives, its true intentions were summed up by Monsanto's Director of Corporate Communication, Phil Angel, in 1998, when he explained, Monsanto should not have to vouch for the safety of biotech food. Our interest is in selling as much of it as possible. Assuring its safety is the FDA's job. But think about it for a second. Actually, what he said was true. By the time he said what he said in 1998, Monsanto had already corrupted the political and the regulatory process by getting Monsanto attorney Michael Taylor appointed as FDA commissioner, who released the infamous blank check disclaimer in spite of vigorous opposition by FDA's own internal scientists and researchers. Monsanto has always told us from the beginning of this great lab experiment that GMOs would reduce the need for herbicides and pesticides, that it would increase crop yield, that it had no effect on the environment, and it would be substantially the same as non-GMO crops. Every single one of those claims has turned out to be false, tragically false. But thanks to the mass media, which dutifully and uncritically parrots Monsanto's lies, GMOs are now embedded in 75% of the food on America's supermarkets shelves. Real science seeks the truth without an agenda. It seeks a greater understanding of the physical and the natural world and the impossibly complex web of interdependence that is life on this planet. Real science goes wherever its observations and its evidence takes it, without apology, without an agenda. Real science is worthy of the name. Monsanto is incapable of it. Monsanto practices what has been termed by a cynical scientific community as tobacco science. Tobacco science is the furthest thing from objective research. It is profoundly self-serving. It's corrupting the scientific method by paying for research that looks only at certain things and only long enough to achieve a narrowly defined corporate objective. If the research comes up with conclusions that don't fit the corporate objectives, it's discarded and done again in a way that does get the results they're looking for. I'm reminded of a joke. Picture a large parking lot at night with a single street light in one corner. There's a drunk guy stumbling around the street light looking for his keys, his car keys. When he's asked where he dropped them, he waves across the parking lot and said, "I dropped them over there somewhere, but the light's better here." Replace the word light with money, and you've got the essence of what tobacco science is all about. Cancer is not a mysterious disease. It's well established that it emerges from some combination of chronic toxicity, deficiency, and inflammation. The sources of toxicity and inflammation are legion, and every cancer patient has their own unique profile. But regardless of the sources, it generally takes about 10 years for cancerous tumors to get big enough to become noticeable, to get on the radar, so to speak. That's 10 years of chronic toxicity, inflammation, and or nutritional deficiencies. So one would think that one would test the GMOs for long enough for cancer to emerge, if it's going to emerge. This makes sense. If you go to the Monsanto website today, you learn very quickly that that's not the case. First of all, Monsanto states on their website that they do no testing on humans. They've never done testing on humans. Why? Because the FDA, you know, the one with the revolving door, says that GMO foods are substantially equivalent to natural foods, and so it's not necessary. But they do test on rats. They test on rats for 90 days, and then they stop. 90 days to a rat is 5 years to a human. That's exactly half the amount of time needed for cancer to reveal itself. So Monsanto is stopping the clock before the real problems arise. In a just world, this would be deemed criminal negligence. Another example, the stomachs of laboratory animals fed GMO foods show chronic inflammation of the stomach lining, resulting in digestive disruption, ulcers, tumors, systemic inflammation, and a host of allergic responses. In interviews with thousands of doctors, they are finding the same symptoms in human adults and children eating GMO foods. Inflammatory bowel disease is up 40% since GMOs were introduced about 30 years ago. Digestive capacity has been reduced. Allergies are skyrocketing. Colitis, ulcers, and a more generalized failure to thrive is commonplace. Many doctors are now prescribing a non-GMO diet. And for those patients that switch to non-GMO, their symptoms often go away in a few days. It's the same with livestock. Pigs that are switched back to non-GMO diets get healthier. They lose the bloat, the diarrhea, the related issues usually within 2 to 3 days. The same dynamic is true with cattle, dogs, cats, and humans. Last example, gluten intolerance and other food allergies have skyrocketed since GMOs were introduced. Consider this, GMOs that produce Bt toxin, the insecticide that breaks open the stomachs of insects and kills them, is having the same effect on the stomach cells of humans. Yet, according to the EPA, which has another one of those lovely revolving doors, according to the EPA, these Bt toxin foods have, quote, no impact on human digestion, and the toxin is destroyed during digestion. The EPA got it wrong, tragically wrong. It has now been proven that the GMO Bt toxin that pokes holes in insect cells does the same thing in human cells. Last year in Canada, they found Bt toxin in, wait for it, 93% of pregnant women and 80% of their fetuses. The real science is clear on this point. GMOs are compromising the integrity and the effectiveness of our digestive systems and those of every creature that eats them. But let's be clear on who the real culprit is. It's not Monsanto. It's not Monsanto. They're not the problem. They are doing, and corporations like them, are only doing what they are allowed to get away with. We've learned over and over in 1,000 tragic ways that there's no such thing as an industry that can police itself. That is the job of our regulatory agencies, and they have been corrupted, and they are failing miserably at their responsibility. Monsanto's research and testing is carefully orchestrated to get the results that they are looking for. Our regulatory agencies are ignoring the independent research on GMOs, and they are accepting Monsanto's own self-serving research without question. This must be stopped. It's time for our regulatory agencies to go back to following the precautionary principle, to serve as watchdogs for the public interest rather than lapdogs for the industries that they are currently pretending to regulate. But it can't be stopped as long as money can buy elections and influence. The only way to get control of that is to amend the Constitution to say that corporations are not people and money is not speech. I'm wrapping it up here, people. Thanks for your patience. We have real science and the truth on our side, so the outcome is certain. But how long it takes is an open question. It all hinges on getting big money out of elections and restoring integrity to our regulatory agencies. When those two things are in place and working, the Monsantos of the world, and there are many others besides Monsanto, will either shrivel and die, or they will transform themselves into a force for good. Right now, we are fighting a desperate fight, one state at a time, to simply require that these frankenfoods are labeled. I know this sounds crazy, but can you imagine a time in the future, this is really crazy, but imagine a time in the future when the food that we buy in our grocery stores is actually not poisonous and toxic. Imagine a time when the food we buy is not a Trojan horse that introduces inflammation, chronic allergic reactions, and disease in everything that consumes it. Imagine a time when we don't have to worry about GMOs and organic versus conventional grown, because all the food we eat has been grown and processed in a healthy, sustainable way in harmony with our bodies and the natural world. Crazy, I know. Crazy.
No, it's good.
Let's work tirelessly toward that goal. Future generations will thank us. And don't forget, Google GMO Summit and register. Go there. Thank you.